Vice Presidents, Deans, and all distinguished guests. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome you all to the APAIE 2012 interactive sessions. I'm Kanapa Pongponrat, lecturer from Mahidol University, and I will be your MC for today. The theme of these sessions is Internationalization in Higher Education for the Benefit of Mankind. And since this is the last conference sessions of the APAIE 2012, we make it more special by inviting the leading figures in educational field to exchange their points of view. In these sessions, we receive a great honor from Professor Piyawat Boon-Long, Executive Director from Knowledge Network Institute of Thailand, to be our moderator. Professor Piyawat Boon-Long received his PhD from Kansas State University in nuclear engineering. In terms of his work experience, he formerly served different educational and research organizations, covering Director of Thailand Research Fund. With his profound knowledge in the field of education, he was also appointed to run significant roles in the following committees: Subcommittee on Higher Education System Research, Thai Commission for Higher Education, Chiang Mai University Governing Board, Ubon Ratchathani Governing Board, and also Subcommittee on Strategic Risk, Thai Red Cross. And to avoid further delay, let me invite our moderator, Professor Piyawat Boon-Long.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be a moderator for this session with three very distinguished speakers to join us this morning. We would like to spend as much time as possible with the speakers, so I will introduce them briefly, and you have all the details of their accomplishments in the conference documents. May I first invite Professor William Brustein. He is from Ohio State University. He is a Vice Provost for Global Strategies and International Affairs, and also a professor in sociology, political science, and history. He will be speaking on a blueprint for the global university. Professor Brustein, please. Our next panelist is Professor Peter Yu Hin Pang from National University of Singapore. He is Assistant Vice President on University and Global Relations, and also an Associate Professor in the Department of Mathematics. He will be speaking on what kind of graduates does the 21st century economy need. Please, Professor Pang. And our third speaker is Professor John Patrick Hearn from the University of Sydney. He is Chief Executive of the Worldwide Universities Network, WUN, and also Vice President International of the University of Sydney. He will be speaking on benefits and risks of internationalization in university reform. Professor Hearn, please. The organizers are very honored to have such distinguished speakers on the panel together, but they are also very worried that we have a very limited time. So we have agreed among the speakers that each will speak for 20 minutes. And at the end of 15 minutes, I will raise my hand to signal that he will have 5 minutes left. At the end of 20 minutes, I will raise 2 hands, so that if they still would like to continue speaking, I am sure the audience will help me in asking questions later. I would like to also say that we have some time at the end of this session, about 25 minutes for question and answers. So please be prepared to ask questions, to use this opportunity to get as much as possible from such distinguished speakers. May I first invite Professor Brustein, please.
Good morning, and I'm honored to be here to have this opportunity to speak about the Global University. I only have 20 minutes and I have 12 steps or pillars to go through, so I must get to it quickly. So let me begin. See, the technology here is not working yet. Okay, there we go. What I'd like to do first is to describe the what, the how, the why, and for whom. The definition of a global university is one that is pretty well accepted. You'll see this definition used quite often by many scholars in the field. And the key thing is here the full integration of international experiences and perspectives into the core missions of a university. But while there might be consensus over what the global university is, there's a lack to date in terms of how you get there and whether a global university is in existence today. And I would argue that it's what the famous Max Weber, the German sociologist of over 100 years ago, would call an ideal type. It's something that we strive for, but have not yet reached. And so what Weber said is to think of an ideal type as an abstraction, an analytical construct. He used it in terms of his work on feudalism, on capitalism, also looking at human behavior. And he said if we can develop an ideal type, then we could look at existing realities and compare them to one another and try to put together what might be the constituent components that one would need to have in place to have this ideal type. So in my presentation, I want you to think of the global university as an ideal type, something we're striving for, and that in order to get there, it needs to have several building blocks, and I'll be focusing on those. And then there's the question of why and for whom. And I think of this in terms of what we refer to often as the elevator speech. You've probably heard that term, the elevator speech. Here you are, you're trying to impress the boss, or you're trying to get a job, and you get on the elevator, and you get on the lobby, and you have 10 flights or 10 levels, and you've got to get your message across by the time you reach the 10th floor because the boss is going to get off. So here's the elevator speech and why the global university is important for whom. I would argue that if we're really going to succeed in one of our core missions in higher education of preparing students today and future generations, to prepare them not only to comprehend, but to be able to design and implement solutions to the critical global challenges of the 21st century, the global university is going to be a necessary institution. And by these challenges, I'm talking about one's health in the area of environment, social, political. And so the global university, in many ways, is for students, and it's for preparing them to tackle those challenges. So let me now, because I only have probably 18 minutes left, launch into my presentation and think of this global university again as an ideal type, let's for a moment think it's this building. Buildings need pillars, but pillars have to be set in a solid foundation. And so for the global university, what I see as foundations that would make it necessary for those pillars to stand erect. First, internationalization has to be perceived as value added. That is that if the stakeholders, faculty, students, administrators, staff, do not see it adding value to what's important to them, then we're not going to be successful. As I often say, altruism, goodwill, will get you so far. Self-interest will get you farther. The second foundation would be that it can't be perceived as a silo, as a smokestack. That is, if we're going to be successful in building the global university, the foundation has to be one in which the internationalization is embedded within all the units across the entire university. So those are the two foundations. Now let me begin with the pillars. And the first pillar, and I'm going to go through some of these rather quickly. Hopefully you can get access to my PowerPoint. Because I have to speak quickly, and since there are 12, but I'm going to spend a little time on a few of them rather than all of them, though I'll go through all 12. The first one being internationalization is included in the strategic plans of all schools and colleges. We take for a given that universities can have strategic plans and internationalization can be part of what they're setting out to do, but we also need those strategic plans that focus on internationalization to be part of the different colleges, whether it's liberal arts, whether it's health, whether it's engineering. And I'll give you the example of the university I'm at Ohio State. We started with 6 strategic goals, and you can see them pretty clearly there. These were endorsed by the Board of Trustees, by the faculty committees, by the Council of Deans, and so that they have become part of the institutional culture now of the university. And I often say that provosts, rectors, vice chancellors, deans, they come and go. If you're going to be successful with internationalization, you need to have it become part of the institutional culture. You need to have it embedded into the strategic plans of each and every unit. So at the Ohio State University, every June when the deans get evaluated by the provost, they have to respond to these 6 goals. What progress have they made in the last year on each and every one of them? And so when the deans get that word, and I'm the one in the provost's office who evaluates the deans on these, the deans then go back to unit or department chairs and say, hey, what are you doing in terms of those 6 goals, which get back to the faculty. So when it becomes part of how people are evaluated each year, it helps in terms of moving forward the international agenda. The second pillar is international aspects are integrated in all majors. And here I would like to say that I know a lot of universities, and my university is similar. They have standalone majors in international studies. I have nothing, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have those, but if you think that's the way to achieve comprehensive internationalization, you have to think again, because when you have a major and not all the students will take that major, what about the students in engineering or in education or in agriculture who are not pursuing that major? How do they get internationalized? So it's got to be not only horizontal, it's got to be, it's not only vertical, it's got to be horizontal as well. And so the way we've set out, and I want to give you another example from the Ohio State University, is that we've come upon 5 essential skills that students need, whether they're in agriculture or in medicine, whether they're undergraduates or graduates. And as you can see, here are the 5 global competencies. And we use them to work with the faculty, work with deans, work with department chairs to rethink the curriculum, the learning experience, and to design a curriculum that with one size not fitting all, but that's relevant to each discipline to accomplish these 5 skills. So our students will be tested and evaluated on these 5 when they receive their degree. And so you see them there, and again, I'm not going to read each and every one to you, but I think you would agree that these are important skills for students in the 21st century. At Ohio State, one of the ways we're trying to achieve them is that we're working with each unit to create what we call a global option, so that when students graduate, that this will not increase their time to graduation. They'll be able to earn their degree in their major, let's say in geography, but at the same time to earn a global option certificate that will go with on their diploma and transcript. And as you see, the requirements there, such things as certainly language, education abroad, a capstone research experience, systematic evaluation, and e-portfolio. And We also use the Global Competency Aptitude Assessment Test to test whether they have gained and mastered those 5 global competencies, because these elements really aim towards the mastery of the 5 global competency skills that I mentioned before. The third pillar, and I'm not going to spend much time here on this with this audience, because that study abroad is more of an issue. I know it's a big issue back home, particularly in the United States, with both curricular and with financial constraints, and something we discuss quite often. But it's certainly necessary, particularly when you see the small number of 1% to 2% of American college students who study abroad. And there are many reasons, but I think curricular and financial play a key role. For example, if one of our students wanted to study, directly enroll in Mahidol University, they would spend a year here, but then have to go back on a campus, and this is true for many US campuses, and petition to get those credits accepted to count for their credits in their own major or at our university. So too many curricular barriers are in place. Plus, sometimes the cost to study abroad is prohibitive. Again, if you were to look at my PowerPoint, if you get a chance, you'll see I give a number of different examples of projects, initiatives in education abroad that have helped to overcome these barriers, and I'm not going to speak about them today, but as many of you who know me, I have a hard time keeping a job. I've been at many universities in my career, including the University of Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Illinois, and now Ohio State, so I've picked up some experiences along the way. Here's another one we developed at University of Pittsburgh, particularly to get our faculty to build relevant education abroad into their courses for what we call integrated field trip abroad. Another one at Pittsburgh, because many students today, even at the undergrad level, when they think about education abroad, they want to be involved in research or international service learning. And here's one we've used at Ohio State with our Gateway program to incentivize faculty to create education abroad opportunities in our Gateway countries, and I'll be speaking about the gateways at the end of this presentation. And just to mention this is one thing we're doing at Ohio State, in that we're moving towards semesters to incentivize students. Now at Ohio State, students have to, at many schools, as you know, earn Gen Ed requirements in their first 2 years. At Ohio State now, you can earn 6 of your Gen Ed requirements, your credits, through study abroad. At the same time, the first 3 that you take, if you do it during our May intersession, or what we call our May session, are cost-free. You don't have to pay tuition for those. So a few ways to incentivize getting more of our first and second year students in particular into education abroad. So, fourth pillar, foreign language proficiency should be a requirement for all students. Again, I'm not going to spend much time with this one, but I really want to emphasize the fact that if we're going to be successful in erecting the global university, foreign language just can't be the preserve of the language and literature majors. We have to get people in law, people in education, people in engineering, agriculture, and that means rethinking how we teach foreign languages. Many people will say, well, English is the lingua franca. Why do your students need? No, if you truly want to understand a phenomenon, if you want to speak to the hearts of people, if you want to delve deep, if you want to establish relationships, it's so important to know the language of your partner. And so it's not enough just to think that only a small portion of our students need to master a second language. All do. Opportunities for student international internships. And again, here, more and more of our students today want this type of experience rather than sitting in a classroom when they study abroad. And so Global University is one that has to truly provide these opportunities. And I really looked in many ways to our international alumni around the world. They've opened many doors for us. And I think the more that you tap into those kinds of resources, as well as to get your senior leadership at your university to make this an important priority when they travel, the sooner we'll be able to achieve this goal. Pillar 6, faculty searches are international and global experience is preferred. Again, it should be a free market, open market in terms of universities hiring the best and the brightest no matter where they're from. And so to have a truly global university, it shouldn't just be restricted to one's nation. It's got to be open. And I'm glad to say at the Ohio State University, our searches are truly international. Pillar 7, international teaching, research, and engagement activities are assigned significant weight in annual reviews. Again, this has been a major challenge, but until we get to a point where not only your annual performance review looks at your international contributions to the research, teaching, and engagement, but promotion and tenure are seen in terms of how is it that you as a faculty member have integrated international comparative aspects into your teaching? How is it that your research involves international partners, or that you're involving your students in your research in overseas research sites? Senior international officers reporting directly to the chief academic and executive officer. Again, the voice of the senior international officer has to be at the key tables where decisions are being made, rather than going through a number of lines of communication. Senior international officers positioned to interact effectively with deans and other councils and committees. And I want to give you an example here because of time at the Ohio State University. We have an international affairs committee which has representation from every academic and service unit on campus. They comprise International Affairs Committee working groups that work on each of the 6 strategic goals, and that goes all the way up to the President's and Provost Council on Strategic Internationalization, which I chair. So it's not something that is top down, it's really bottom up at our university, and I think this is a good model. Barriers are eliminated to the recruitment of international students, and here, the key thing is we put such attention at universities on recruiting students, we have to put more on retaining them, making a quality experience, getting them to help internationalize our classrooms, our communities, and breaking out of what one might call the ghettoization, that so many of them cluster together and don't really truly experience the diversity of the university campus. 11 is drawing more upon our rich resource of the immigrant communities in our areas. Again, whether it's in assisting with foreign language instruction or lecture series. Now, I only have about 3 or 4 minutes left, and this is the key one I wanted to focus on. Global partnerships, and one that I've been spending a lot of time on for the last few years, and in many reasons why Ohio State brought me in. And that's to think in terms of international engagement or your partnerships very strategically. So often when we think about international partnerships, it's like a gold rush. Everyone's running out there trying to sign people up, but not thinking, well, how does this fit in or align with our strategic thinking, our core missions of the university? And so I list a number of factors that I look at and my staff we look at when it comes to building international relationships. I would say it's better to be have fewer than many, and to spend the time with those and to build them deep and to build them broadly. And I'm going to talk about one way we have set up to do that, and that's the global gateways that the Ohio State University has embarked upon to help us with our international partnerships. I'm not a big advocate of building branch campuses, and I hope in the question and answer period you'll give me an opportunity to tell you why. I'm more of a fan of building what I call these mini embassies. We call them global gateways that are truly multifunctional in areas of the world that map very well, not only to the strength and interest of my university, but because my university is a land-grant university. It serves the entire state of Ohio to the interests of the state of Ohio. So we've embarked on setting up these global gateways, opened our first in Shanghai in 2010. 2 weeks ago, we opened our second in Mumbai. In 2 years, we'll be opening the next one in Sao Paulo, then on to Istanbul, and on to East Africa. But these are many embassies that have three key dimensions. There's the academic dimension of the Gateway. It facilitates and promotes our faculty's teaching and research collaborations. It serves and helps us with educational intelligence within that region. It helps us with student intake, study abroad, internship opportunities. That's the academic dimension of the Gateway. It also has an alumni engagement. Our international alumni are often forgotten. I know we have Gretchen Dobson here, who is a specialist on this. Raise your hand, Gretchen. And who's writing a book, and has just published a book on the international alumni. But the fact is that international alumni are often forgotten, that we have to reconnect them to our universities. They can open up opportunities for our students, for our faculty, and the Gateway spends a lot of time as one of its chief dimensions cultivating and engaging our alumni. The third component is the corporate partnership program of the Gateway, and that is that at Ohio State, corporations that have Ohio ties, whether they're Procter & Gamble or Cardinal Health, or ones like Philips Healthcare in China, where the CEO is an Ohio State alumnus, we work with them to meet their needs and provide services. And I want to end on looking at that. More on the gateways, and I want to get to the corporate partnership program, which is a very creative, I think, part of the gateways. What we do here is that we offer services through the Gateway to companies, and these are services that can workforce development. We will provide in the area of food safety, develop programs for them. Particularly, we're working with Bright Foods in China, a major food company, because of our expertise on our campus in pre-harvest to post-harvest food safety programs. Develop these training programs to help them tackle those issues, for which we are compensated, and that helps offset the cost of running the Gateway. They're the career services. When I travel around the world, and particularly in our Gateway countries, I'm often asked, well, what kinds of, can you help us with human talent? We need great managers. And so particularly when I'm dealing with China, we have 3,000 Chinese students earning degrees on our campus. And oftentimes companies will come to us and say, my God, we're looking for a Chinese national who has an advanced degree from your university. So we're like matchmakers. We bring the people to these companies to meet their needs. And then there's the consultation and research services our gateways provide through the corporate partnership program, which is to be able to offer solutions to research and consulting problems such as risk assessment in different countries. So this is our gateway. It's how we address that 12th pillar of international partnerships. So in end, I will say that there's no one size that fits all, but this is my list of constituent parts or pillars to create what we so much need, that of the global gateway, of the global university. And I look forward later to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Brustein, for a very inspiring and also concrete proposal. May I go on to the next speaker, Professor Peter Yu-Hin Pang, who will speak on what kind of graduates does the 21st century economy need. Professor Pang, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Let me start by thanking our host, President Rajata, and his incredibly capable team. Thank you very much for the invitation, for bringing us here. I've really enjoyed the conference so far. And also, thank you to President Lee for the leadership in APAIE and for organizing such a wonderful event. Now, as is customary for an Asian, I need to also start with an apology, but this is a real apology this time, not just for show. The abstract which you see is actually, I'm actually not talking about that. I first submitted that abstract for an entirely different session. The theme of this particular session is internationalization, so I'm going to speak about internationalization. Yeah? In fact, my presentation is going to be a very narrow presentation. Unlike Bill, I've only worked at one university, so I can only share experience from one university. So Actually, I'm going to talk about something rather specific. I am going to talk about international partnerships as a vehicle for innovation, and I'm going to share, some examples from NUS. Okay, so let me start with sort of this very general, right? I mean, everybody knows this, of course, the aims of internationalization of higher education. And there are many, obviously, right? So the first and foremost, I suppose, is to produce graduates who are globally minded, who are global citizens. In Singapore, this is perhaps especially important because, as those of you who know Singapore, you take one small step and you're outside of the country already. So whatever you do has to be global, right? Because there's nothing domestic, essentially. So I think that's really the first. But of course, this I think it's important not only for Singapore, but for everybody else because of the nature of globalization, the globalized world and all that. Second is, of course, to attract talent. So part of internationalization involves attracting good international students, good international faculty, and so on. And the third is to increase capacity or capability to leapfrog, to enhance competitiveness. This is used a lot, right? And NUS has been using that a lot as well. We started relatively late. We are a relatively young university. We've been around for 107 years this year. But as far as being a research-intensive global university is concerned, we really started only about 15, 20 years ago. So this has been extremely useful for us to get up to speed in a very speedy, in a very fast manner. The fourth is to widen access to higher education. And by this, I have in mind especially, branch campuses and things like that, right? So you offer a lot more people to have opportunity to have higher education. Of course, there is sort of something which is sometimes also associated with this, which is the revenue, revenue generation as well. And the fifth is really what I want to talk about, benchmark and innovate to create new models of higher education. So I'll share some examples from NUS just to say a little bit about how we are using our international partnerships in order to achieve aims like this. We actually have an 8-prong, so this is the NUS internationalization strategy. We actually have an 8-prong strategy: international education, international research, enterprise, students, faculty and staff, alumni, alliances and networks, including APAIE, and international benchmarks. But of course, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I thought I would say at least a few words about the first 3. So, international education, or global education. So we have 2 sort of strategies. One is bring the world to NUS, and the other is take NUS students to the world. And let me say a bit about each one. Bring the world to NUS. We do co-teaching. I've mentioned UBC. So we have a module on migration. And UBC as well. So these are actually 2 independent modules taught independently at the 2 campuses, but at certain points, the 2 students from the 2 campuses come together, right, via video conferencing and so on. So that has been quite successful. And a spin-off from this is that they have also created, because of the interaction, sort of the virtual interaction of the students, they have also created summer programs where students actually do come together face-to-face. We do this with MIT as well, with Yale, and so on and so forth. We have many, many joint degree programs with Duke, with MIT, with Cambridge, and so on. We have actually more than 60, about 70 joint degree programs with partners all around the world. Joint campus, this is something relatively new, and I'm going to touch on this example later on. This is the Yale NUS College, which is not yet open, by the way. And we also believe a lot in internationalization at home. A lot of our students go overseas, but still a substantial number of our students do not go overseas. And we feel that we also need to cater to these students who are not going overseas so that they have some international exposure even when they are on our campus. The other is take NUS students to the world. So these are students going outside. About 25% of our undergraduate students go overseas for a semester or more. An equal number, therefore making up about 1 in every 2 student undergraduate going overseas for some program, right? So those who are not staying for 1 semester or more may be spending 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks overseas. This was a target that we set ourselves about 5 years ago, and we have surpassed these targets. So right now we have more than 25, we have 28% who are going overseas for a semester or more, and we have 51% altogether who are going overseas. And as my colleague, Professor N. Pakia will tell you, the reward in Singapore for surpassing your target is that you are given new targets. So our target for the next 5 years is that 70% of our students should go overseas, 70%. Our annual undergraduate intake is about 6,500. So 70% is more than 4,000 students going overseas. Yeah. As I said, we have many joint and double degree programs. We have many partner universities. Actually, 180 is university level partners. If you count faculty, departmental partners, we have more than 300 in 40 countries. We have something which is quite unusual, which we call overseas college. By the way, we have no campus overseas, and at the moment there's no plan to have any campus overseas, but we do have this interesting program which we call overseas college, which I'll talk about in a minute. International research, there is of course a lot of individual linkages, people are writing papers together and so on, but there are 2 large initiatives that we are undertaking at the moment. One is called CREATE. CREATE stands for Campus for Research Excellence and Technological Enterprise. Now, what happens at the CREATE campus is that, well, it's project-based, right? So it's research project-based, but for each research project, we actually invite a partner university to come and set up a joint lab with us. So we have a number of universities having joint labs on our campus. And these universities include MIT, ETH Zurich, Shanghai Jiao Tong University, Technion, Cambridge, and so on and so forth, right? So this is located, actually some of you may have heard about our university town. This is actually located on University Town. For those who have the opportunity to come to Singapore, and I hope you do, you are more than welcome to come and visit our University Town, which is a new development on our campus that we are very proud of. Our second research initiative overseas is actually a lab that we have set up in China. So this is the NUS Research Institute in Suzhou. We are hoping to do 3 things at this research institute. One is, of course, to carry out research. The second is to have executive education and so on. And the third is commercialization of research. Okay, so let me say a few words about overseas college. Actually, it's not a brick and mortar college, right? We have no branch campus, we have no intention. We have a few offices overseas, but that's all we have. But the overseas college program is actually an experiential entrepreneurship education program, right? So what happens under this program is that our students spend 1 year overseas. During that 1 year, they work full-time. They work full-time mostly in startup companies, right? And they take courses part-time at our partner universities. So we have right now 7 programs under the Overseas College program. The first one was set up at Silicon Valley, where we partner with Stanford. Then in Philadelphia, partnering with UPenn, in Shanghai, Stockholm, and so on. The latest one is in Israel. I just wanted to emphasize this point that for internationalization, I think it's very important to have the right infrastructure as well. So you need to have the space. I'm not a geographer, but this is something that a geographer would say, right? Space is so important to facilitate, the right kinds of activities. So this is University Town. And the idea of University Town is that it really is a place that brings people together, right? I've talked about the researchers, but there are also the residential colleges that bring together both international and domestic students and so on. Okay, so let me now go to this international partnership. as a vehicle for innovation. And I just wanted to share 3 examples. And these are 3 examples of deep interaction or deep partnerships with 3 partners. This is, I guess, a sexy way to introduce what I'm trying to say. Okay, so the first example I wanted to use is our Yong Siu To Conservatory of Music, which was established in 2003 in partnership with the Peabody Institute at the Johns Hopkins University. I think at the beginning of the Yong Siu To Conservatory, very much we use the Johns Hopkins name, the Peabody name, in order to leapfrog, right? And I think the results have been quite spectacular. We've had wonderful students, and they are winning all sorts of competitions and so on and so forth. We are now into the second phase of this partnership. The first phase was 5 years, and we are now entering the second phase of the partnership. And we have just created a joint degree program with the Peabody Institute. As far as we know, this is the first international conservatory joint degree program in the world. So phase 1, 2001 to 2006, as I said, they lent their name, they advised us on the building, admissions, and so on and so forth. So it's very much a leapfrogging kind of setup. But as we move into phase 2, things are changing a little bit. So the role of Peabody is now more like an institutional colleague rather than a mentoring organization. Peabody adds value, obviously, to faculty development, student experience. So we have student exchange with Peabody. Our students are able to spend time at Peabody. If they spend enough time, they can even do the joint degree that I mentioned. The conservatory has other exchange partners as well, including the Conservatory of Lausanne and so on and so forth. So we begin to see that the relationship, sort of the nature of the relationship matures, right? To become something a little bit more collaborative rather than one way. So I wanted to bring your attention to some of the innovation that they're able to do. So if you look at the third point, I mentioned here that new curriculum established more suited to the local context and more radical in pedagogical underpinnings and so on. And I just wanted to give you an elaboration which was written by the Dean of the Conservatory. So I'm just going to read out what he told me. Our first year concepts and materials program is quite radical in being team taught and in integrating traditional elements of theory, ear training, keyboard skills, pastiche composition, ensemble musicianship into a large first year module involving online and peer development techniques. A number of the sort of pedagogical innovations are developed at Peabody in partnership with, at Yong Siu To in partnership with Peabody. And there is value for both Yong Siu To and for Peabody because some of these are not practiced at Peabody. So I want to move to the second example, and that's the Duke NUS Graduate Medical School. So for the presidents and vice chancellors among us here, you know that what is making your hair white or gray is the medical school. We have 2 medical schools at NUS. So we have a British-style MBBS medical school, and in 2007 or so, we established also this American-style MD medical school. So a bit of the history of the Duke NUS Medical School. In the year 2000, the Singapore government launched a $3 billion biomedical sciences initiative, right? And at that point, the government realized that we are lacking in expertise, right? So we really need to groom a group of, a generation of clinician scientists who can bring this biomedical sciences initiative forward. So negotiations started with Duke, MOU was signed, and so on and so forth. By the way, the first intake of students in 2007, there were 26 students in that first intake. And things have really grown. From the entering class of 26 in 2007, now we have 186 MD students, 12 PhD students from 21 countries, and more than 40 undergraduate institutions, including Oxford, Cambridge, Johns Hopkins, Yale, Harvard, Peking, Stanford. In terms of research, it's also grown leaps and bounds. So great progress made. I recall yesterday in Carla's session, we were talking about international partnerships, and one of the most important ingredients of a successful international partnership is trust. So let me just read out a quote from you. This is by Professor Victor Zhao, who is Duke's Chancellor for Health Affairs. And he said, Duke has built many relationships with strategic partners around the world, but we will always see Duke NUS as the crown jewel of our international activities. It represents a distinctive achievement by multiple committed and trusting partners, Duke NUS and the Singapore government, that is unparalleled. Now, the real innovation at Duke NUS, and again, this is the great attraction to Duke, because they found that they could not quite implement in Duke. And now they're going to do it because now they have a model to bring it back to Duke. And it is a pedagogical method which is called team lead. Right? So what I want to do, I'm sorry I'm far too slow, but I wanted to show you just a very, very short video, because you might as well hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So I thought I'll just show you this, just a few minutes. So they describe the team lead pedagogy.
Articles on current military research, a variety of things that the faculty decided to cover the core principles.
Thursday mornings. They then have 30 minutes to complete an individual readiness assessment exam of 25 questions. The exam questions are well written and not ambiguous. And so the students then are engaged then in a serious process of how much have I learned? And there's an element of individual responsibility. At the end of that 30 minutes, there's a very exciting event, which is when the students turn from struggling as an individual to then being able to talk with their teammates. And I never tire of watching this transition.
Then the instant the clock goes, suddenly the volume goes very, very high, and they're all talking and discussing and really engaging with each other.
It is not talk about it.
And now the team has to do the same test again. And for each question, the team only gets to submit one answer. So part of what this methodology does is it forces a student to explain why I know this to be the right answer. This is how I understand it, and this is why I understand it. And try to convince the other students and have a discussion about it. And it's through that discussion that they can crystallize their ideas and remember it a lot better.
Part of what Team Lead is designed to do is help the students begin to take ownership in their own learning and understand where their gaps are and what they know and what they don't know. The next phase of that process, the students then have to ask questions about their gaps.
We would ask each group to write down their questions, and we would assign those questions to another group to answer in a formal way. So one group would write down their question, and we would say, take this question and give it to another group. Give all the groups 10 minutes to prepare, and then have a group discussion. Each session, we assigned a student to stand at the front of the class and facilitate the discussion.
Any more questions about acetaminophen's this result?
Basically, they have a control which would give you no inflammation. I would treat and resolve the dermatitis before trying to do a test like that.
I think I'm going to cut it off here.
in place of this? From what I know, we use.
And I'll move to the Yale NUS College, which is my last example. By the way, just one word about this team lead methodology. One of the objectives is to make sure that students have no time to fiddle with their cell phones during class. Yeah, so they're always doing something. Yeah? Okay, so this is my last example. Is the Yale NUS College. As I said, it's not yet open. What we're hoping to achieve at the Yale NUS College is really to explore a new model for liberal arts education in Asia. The concept of liberal arts education is not well understood in Asia, and in fact, we spent a lot of time, 2-3 years' time, talking to various communities, parents, students, and so on. Basically, doing some marketing kind of study, whether there is demand. But what we find is that actually the concept is not well understood. Yeah. What we are trying to do really is to explore whether there is an Asian model for liberal arts. So the principal sort of element of liberal arts, of course, is more interactive learning experience. One of the things that we are able to do at the Yale NUS College, because we are starting from a clean slate, right, is that we can really think about what are the majors that we want to offer. And the majors that will be offered will be all interdisciplinary, and it will be fully residential as well. So this is how the curriculum looks like. So essentially, 38% of the curriculum will be common, and there are 4 strands to it. One is great works, and in great works, as they read Aristotle, they also read Confucius, and so on and so forth, right? So it's the East-West, the Asian model that, again, we're looking at. Second strand is natural sciences. Third strand is individuals and society. And the fourth is interdisciplinary courses. So that's the common curriculum, 38%, and there's 31% in a major, and 31% electives and prerequisites to majors. So I started with this. It is actually the campaign, the admissions campaign that we use for Yale NUS. Far more than the sum of its parts, Yale NUS offers a unique and powerful education. We certainly hope that this will pan out. The first intake will be next year. And it's going to be a small college. At a steady state, there are only going to be 250 per year for a sort of a steady state student population of 1,000. We will keep you posted how things develop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pang. Very interesting and very clear examples of the new developments in Singapore. May I invite the third speaker, Professor John Hearn, who will speak on benefits and risk of internationalization in university reform. Professor Hearn, please.
Thank you very much. And I thank Professor Rajan Tanavin very much for he and his colleagues hosting the meeting here, and I'm very grateful to APAIE for honoring me with the invitation to speak. It's also a pleasure to share a platform with William Brustein and Peter Yuhin Pang. And since I agree with pretty much everything they said, I'll try not to repeat things that they said. It's really quite interesting that internationalization of higher education and research is now becoming the focus of attention for some of the leading international agencies with which we work. And examples of that are the OECD, where there is a major task force on that topic, and there's another major task force on innovation, higher education, and research in development, both critical areas. The European Union has established, again, a program to look at internationalization of higher education and what that could mean for teamwork across the world. And the World Bank is looking at engaging with leading world universities. Likewise, from our side, I think there's not a university in the leading 200 in the world who is not challenging itself with what the strategies and policies for engagement might be. I guess a central question I'd put, and we have medical presidents here, and I'm a biomedical researcher, is that I think we tend to spend a great deal of time on diagnosis, a fair bit of time on prescription, and not much time in taking the medicine or action. And perhaps we need to adjust that equation. But what I'd like to do today is just touch on a few items that relate to the global framework of higher education. Take an example, the Worldwide University Network, which is 19 universities globally working together in just 4 areas with 77 research groups. And then to finish with a very quick look forward at one or two of the factors that perhaps we might discuss and keep in mind. But I think the overall theme of this conference, that is to take social responsibility and to deliver results for mankind, is an absolute critical framework for us as we move universities central to society and yet need to take responsibility for what that means. I'll start with a President's Forum we held in Shanghai of the Worldwide Universities Network, a bit like we had the privilege of 2 days ago here. And the question I asked the WN presidents on the board was, what are your single factors that you think would drive the future of higher education and research? Now, I'm not going to go through my slides in detail. I'd request, please, that you read them. And it was quite interesting. We got consensus in one day that these were the factors that would drive the future. Firstly, talent, the major competition for staff and students globally. And the scenario where you might see staff and students with joint appointments, part-time in several locations, in a way personalized, customized, or rather personalized medicine, not customized medicine, customized, personalized education, a theme for the future. The issue of privatization, and again, I'm not going to go into these, but privatization is a fast rising factor. Genuine interdisciplinary research, real curriculum reform, the experience of student life, which is very different now when many students have to work to pay bills, and how we can assist in their achieving a really fundamental education that will fit for challenges in the future that we don't even know about. And then internationalization is a key issue across the board. When I put that you could have one more thing to identify as a factor, we didn't get consensus because several of our presidents felt that technology transfer was a key issue in transferring knowledge, even though it, in the best, most successful models, is only bringing in from patents and so forth about 3% of operating budget. And we need to remember that because governments think that we can pay for ourselves with such activities. Second, that being central to the community was key. And third, that actually we have an opportunity to work with society to shape future society. A big challenge. Of course, we've all been affected by the global financial crisis. And if you look at some of the opportunities and threats, they are fairly clear. Again, I won't go through in detail, but I think we need to return to our roots. We need to return to core values, and we need to return to respect for our history and our national characteristics, as well as for the shared global approach to higher education. One of the issues that I think is both an opportunity and a threat are the ranking systems, which tend to narrow us into trying to emulate or trying to meet key performance indicators, which are not ours, it's theirs. So we can be listed in a long ranking. And in the course of that, lose some of the vital national characteristics that are essential for us in the future to share in a genuine academic environment. So some of the opportunities are that we can develop curricula that lead to thinking, questioning citizens, and address major global challenges through teamwork by working together. Some of the threats, well, clearly there have been and are multiple threats to resources of all sorts, from inputs from government, inputs from industry, and indeed huge challenge for presidents, how they manage and lead through a very challenging environment. But I think the biggest threat, the biggest enemy, is perhaps the enemy within, that we would step back and say, oh, it's all too hard, there's too much risk, we can't engage internationally, let's just close the doors and do our own thing in our own universities or our own countries. And as UNESCO said, this would be a disaster, because at no time in history, with development both in the developed and less developed world, is it more important for us to invest in higher education and research and to invest in global partnerships. Now, in coming to the Worldwide Universities Network, which I have the honor to serve as chief executive, I'm not suggesting that this is superior or whatever to any of the 100 networks, many of whom we work in. What the Worldwide Universities Network focuses on characteristically is research, bottom-up research in 4 main areas with over 1,000 participants around the world, giving us a genuine global approach to those 4 areas, which are adapting to climate change and food security, public health, particularly focused on this plague that is going to hit us of non-communicable disease, already well established, reforms in global higher education and research, because as higher education and research does move central to society, we are going to be challenged by working with other sectors and what that means in terms of reform for effectiveness. Again, coming back to the theme of this conference. And then the 4th understanding cultures, and I'll come back to a couple of examples in each of these. And overall, I mean, it's really quite interesting to see how interdisciplinary research is necessary to even take a few steps these days. You can be very technology rich, but if you don't understand the cultures, there's not going to be uptake, for example. So the members of WN are 19 members around the world. Recently, Campinas in Brazil joined, and they're not yet on that list, but they will be very shortly. And I'll just finish, because I'd like to cut my time, with a few comments on adapting, on the 4 areas in which we work. You might say that nothing much new could be done in the climate change arena, but I think in terms of adaptation to climate change, what the common sense approaches can be for us as individuals, households, universities, and so forth, to adapt to climate change and mitigate climate change, there is quite a lot one can do. And we saw a fair bit of that, actually, in the President's Forum 2 days ago, in terms of the work that the Chinese University of Hong Kong and the others represented there are doing to put words into actions. In looking at the policies and practical responses to climate change, we aim from the Worldwide University Network to take informed, data-driven policy options to government and to the international agencies. And we're doing that in terms of putting those options to the United Nations, to the World Health Organization, to OECD, which is a government, 32 government think tank, and to the World Bank and the European Union as examples. But the focus of what is a very big area, you have to focus down, and food security is clearly becoming a priority with water, ocean acidification, sea level rise, health and energy as the major issues. In our public health programs, we focus on the early determinants for healthy development. One would say, well, that's common sense, but it's quite interesting that the international agencies and governments usually assume that we're going to adopt healthy lifestyles and then have to spend billions on the later life effects in obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. So we think we can take a look at the early determinants, going back to pre-pregnancy and pregnancy in maternal and child health, and then to nurturing healthy growth and development. So that is a very active area of our work. We also need to reinvent some of these systems around that, and education, and in particular health literacy, to make it easier. Because this is about behavioral change, and behavioral change is perhaps the most difficult area to make a difference. And particularly if we want to focus on the Millennium Development Goals and the bottom billion people who are threatened hugely in these areas, then there's a major challenge in communication. In higher education and research, I've given an earlier indication, so I won't take long here. I think that in 10 years, 15 years, the university as we know it is going to be a wholly different beast. It's going to require different leadership from our presidents, different teaching and engagement from our faculty, and different engagement and participation from students. I do think this is the most exciting period when we can escape from some of the traditional methods, but I hope not too much. I think that retaining the fundamentals of any field one's teaching adding the frontiers of knowledge of where research is now, and adding what that means to our lives and how one can engage, is a way I hope that we can teach our students to be thinking ahead to the challenges that will face them. And finally, understanding cultures, which increasingly has come from a rather abstruse group of projects to something much more focused. And I'll just mention one, really. Among our universities, we have 14 contemporary China centers of various sorts. I mean, people doing a huge range of studies on China and with China. And what we want to do is to bring that together to focus on the dynamics of China in the world, the two-way understanding of thinking between Chinese development and global development. And it is a two-way thing, because ways of thinking are quite different, not just between China and others, but between China and many other individual countries. So one of the things a worldwide universities network might do is to get a forum together that can say, how practically can we engage in understanding each other better, and then use that model in international understanding more broadly. So finishing then, internationalization of higher education and research. I think all of us, I mean, one's talking to the converted here, but it's a massive opportunity for each of us to take leadership in engaging and learning, not telling others, and how we might develop the world. In order to do it, though, as I said at the start, I think we have to move from a model of diagnosis, prescription, and action, which might be currently like 60, 30, 10%, to something that's more like 30, 30, 30, with more of an emphasis on teamwork, implementation, and action. The world is moving very, very quickly, and often in government or business circles, academia is seen as still a place for talk rather than action. So we need to understand what the framework is, and it'll be different for each university. We need to understand what the timeline is, and that's entirely a matter that has to be bottom up and take account of the resources, the ambitions, and where one wants to be in 5 years' time. Quality in all of these, whether it's the Worldwide Universities Network or anything else, quality review and strong governance, particularly if one is working globally, is absolutely vital. I mean, it's difficult enough to understand and manage one university without trying to build teams of 20 or more universities, but they can be done. So quality is vital. The capacity, a realistic understanding of the teams and networks, and the capacity and focus, because again, if one tries to do everything, if one tries to be everything to everyone, it's doomed to failure. And then the issue, finishing, of leadership. And that's so much an issue for presidents and supporting them, vice presidents and faculty, but everyone in the community. Just how far does one want to go? Just how far can one engage? And just how far can one deliver results in our responsibilities to benefit mankind? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hearn, for very insightful information, presentation, and also for sacrificing some of your time for the others' question and answer. Now, we have about 10 minutes for question and answer and comments. Lady first. Sorry, Dr. Ninat.
Thank you. I'm On Wasan Wisut, Mahidol University. I would like to thank all three speakers for those excellent presentation. My question has to do with the internationalization within and the problem of how universities that exist for so long, the staff, academic staff who has been so used to the former thinking mode. And the time changes. So you do have a clash of the difference of mindset, with one being more conventional and the others coming in from abroad, trying to bring internationalization and trying to push it forward. And those different cultures of teaching, when one of the instructors was trying to do the old conventional ways to give as much as you want for knowledge. And the other side of the coin is to go for demand-driven, is to oppress the way you need to have the students and you want to have a market demand. So these two things at the moment is what the challenge we have at the institution trying to internationalize, is that it is not the same, and time scale has been changing. How is that future demand being addressed in you trying to push forward internationalization of the higher education? And the second part has to do with the system of education before university. Is it a bit too late? We got all the students who has been teaching, it's been in a system differently. They've been in a very, very teaching spoon-feed type, and you're trying to say, here, you have to think, you have to analyze, you have to change the way you learn.
Thank you. May I invite Professor Ninat to pose the second question, and then we'll ask the panelists third question. Okay, we gather three questions and then ask the panelists to answer. Please.
Thank you, Professor Piyawat. I just want to join the members of the panel to convey our appreciation to President Ratchatar for providing us with the opportunity to listen to our three speakers. Now, I think John and Bill say a few words on bottom up, and I'm sitting next to the Director of International Office at GE. In South Asia, more of us are very familiar with the top-down approach rather than the bottom-up. Although Peter didn't mention bottom-up, but the implication is that when you have different overseas college, especially when you have the liberal art college, new one, that's an indication. Now, it's very easy for Mahidol to position, I think probably the only university that has more than 2 medical colleges. Comparable to NUS, interesting that I have one British model, the other one is the American model. Now, my question is probably for all three of you in terms of, when you talk about the structure that have the bottom approach, it's easier for you to talk about World University Network, talk about the global gateway to address the 12 pillars or whatever Bill is talking about. But the interesting about NUS is every time you go to NUS, there's some changes. I remember the days, how would you restructure NUS? I think before the 80s, I remember that everything said, you have to ask one lady. If people are familiar in US, one lady by name of Madame Sinclair, they have to wait until this lady to retire to replace her with 9 persons. So if you want to talk to negotiate in US, talk to this one lady, Madame Sinclair. And I've been working with Lim Pin, Professor Lim Pin, for 20 years. He's the longest serving vice chancellor, I think, as long as she's in the international office.
Dr. Ninat, can you wrap up the question, please?
Very question now. I mean, how would you restructure from one person, I mean, very dominant position, I mean, everything now you have, I don't know, so many colleges. I mean, how would you restructure that, I mean, from the, how would you do that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you pass the microphone to the back? Yes. the third question, and then we'll go back to the panelists.
Thank you very much. Gabriele Abermann from Salzburg University of Applied Sciences. Thank you very much, all three of you, for your inspiring talks. You presented us the ideal type, I would say, already, whereas we are personally, I would say, especially, are still struggling with somehow getting where you are. Professor Pang, I have a question to you, because I've found it extremely fascinating what you did with your team lead project. We in Europe are talking a lot about, in the Bologna process, about student-centered learning. We're talking a lot about how to formulate learning outcomes and so on. And I think we are very much often too focused on formulating learning outcomes rather than looking at the way of instruction. So my question is really, how did you, and that's related to what you said, how did you, what did you do in order to make your faculty see and understand that this is a very important way to teach? And do you have any data already how this has impacted student results? Have these students performed better than others? Because I think this would be convincing to faculty, because I often hear the objection that, well, students don't learn enough when they do such teamwork. I'm personally convinced of the opposite, but I would like to hear from you what you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I invite the speakers to respond to any of the questions after you, but you have 2 minutes each to respond. Professor Brustein first, Professor Fang second, and Professor Hearn first. Please, Professor Brustein.
Okay, is this on? Good. Yeah, on the wonderful questions, let me just make some comments trying to pull them together because of time. Let me start off by saying I think that the universities, the typical university is still thinking backwards, is 19th century thinking, when we need to think 21st century when it comes to structure and organization. Amaran, to your question, particularly in that vein, at least in the United States, there is a very big disconnect between what we call kindergarten to 12th grade, and then 13th through their 16th or 18th, wherever you want to go. We're not talking to one another, we're not working together, and so those conversations need to happen, they're beginning to happen, because you can't expect universities to take in these students when what they have had before hasn't really prepared them for what the universities can offer. I think that we're moving much more towards breaking down from academic departments. That's happening in Asia, it's happening in Europe, in the United States, to more an education that is more interdisciplinary, focused on problems, being driven by problems rather than putting people in silos. I'll end just by saying, in response to all those questions, that if the universities, in my view, are going to be successful in the 21st century and thereon, they're going to have to think about scarce resources and how you deal with that challenge. They're going to have to be much more entrepreneurial and innovative. They're going to have to think in partnerships, and partnerships just doesn't mean partnerships between academic units within a university. It means partnerships around the world that are strategic, but partnerships with the business community, with your international alumni, and that we're going to have universities that are much more problem-solving focused.
Thank you very much. Professor Pang, please.
I'll first make the comment about the pre-university preparation. You know, Singapore is a very special place, and it's very small, very easy to govern, very easy to do things, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of coordination, actually, at all different levels. In fact, at the university, when we are talking about internationalization, we have teachers coming to us from the schools to say that before they come to the university, they have already been to China, they have been to India, they have been to Africa, they have been to this and that. What more can the university do for them, right? So actually, there is a lot of sort of corresponding changes in the schools, and sometimes they pressure us to do more. Now, about the mindset change and so on, the 3 programs that I have described to you are, as you understand, very special programs. We start from a clean slate, which is why we are able to do some of these things, which is why you find it difficult to implement. By the way, we built on the team taught methods of Duke, but we went a couple of steps further, right? So Duke found that they couldn't really do that because then they have to make changes, then people have to accept and so on and so forth. So we are starting from a clean slate, which gives us good opportunity to really experiment with new stuff. Yale is the same thing, and the conservatory is the same thing. So I think the way to really have this mindset change is to create small successes that people can really, well, small in the sense of small programs, but big successes that people can really see. So for the Duke NUS students have proven the power of the approach. I'm reading off from the Duke press release here. Duke NUS students have proven the power of the approach, scoring well above the mean for all US medical students on both the clinical knowledge and basic science exams in the United States medical licensing exams. So what you need to do, I think, is to create these things so that people begin to accept.
Thank you. Professor Hearn, please.
Thank you. If you excuse me, I'll just keep very brief action points, which are rather superficial because each of those questions were very deep. I think, Emron, that the traditional versus international approach from faculty, I think we're going to have to pay more attention to faculty development through career. And it would actually be quite exciting to have both faculty, perhaps every couple of years, courses that have components that include state-of-the-art IT and include seminars on internationalization, because it's quite hard for faculty who are very busy with their research, their teaching, their grants, their mentorship, and so forth, to actually open and step back and look at what does internationalization mean, even though we all, say, yes, it's great, but what does it mean, and what does it demand from us? So I think faculty development, and some of that could be online, would be good. Secondly, and I think more difficult, the tradition of learning methods among students from, say, US, UK, Asia, Australia, Latin America. That has to be, I guess, led by faculty who are open to being questioned and challenged. And I know in some areas, students spend most of their time in rote learning. I try to encourage my first-year students to ask questions right from the first lecture. And you can see that some of them, because we have 149 nationalities, some of them are horrified at that idea. You can see it in the faces. We don't ask questions of the professor because the professor knows everything. Well, I make quite clear that I don't know the answer to some questions, and that's a horror as well. But anyway, so I think that's more difficult, but it needs to be led by faculty, and the students are quite smart enough to do that. The third question I'd like to just finish, to get an Asia model, again, huge challenge, and I wouldn't give any simple solution, but I'd say let's encourage diversity, because you try to copy Stanford or Oxford that have been there for many, many years, in some Oxford 600 years, and it's ridiculous. I mean, look to the future, keep the fundamentals, keep national characteristics, keep the richness that we can share in knowledge and education, and avoid being pressed into some kind of linear model. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is a very fitting closing remark for the session. So we have one more question. Okay, please.
Thank you.
Last one.
I'll make it very quick, I'm sure. Christine Bunderson, University of Queensland. Thank you very much for the sessions this morning. And my question actually goes to you in the context of some of the discussion this morning and in the context of a number of the panel sessions over the last 3 days, where we have learned about individual institutional initiatives at internationalization and globalization at major universities in a number of countries in the world. But not all universities in the world and not all students in all universities in the world are able to access a number of these initiatives and programs that we have been discussing. And today's employers are demanding graduates who have the skills to navigate a rapidly changing globalized world. Graduate unemployment in some of the traditional economic powerhouses has hit record highs. Korea 20%, Japan 30%, China 30%, UK 20%, US 12%, etc. How can the global higher education sector do more to prepare graduates to meet these challenges and to bridge the skills gap between higher education and the graduate job market, both locally, nationally, and internationally? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to say that it's a very good question, but we perhaps need at least an hour more to do justice to that. Professor, okay. Anyone willing to?
Yeah, again, I do agree that we need obviously more than 2-3 minutes to answer the question. Yes, in the United States, it's become a big problem, particularly in humanities, social sciences, the number of PhDs being produced and the lack of jobs. And what you're finding more often now, many students are being told when they apply that if you're thinking of a tenure track job in a research university, you better think again because there's just so few. So think about maybe international opportunities, working in research, think tanks. But we have to do more on our campuses in terms of training them so their skills are more adaptable. And what I would argue here is that let's sit down and think, well, what are the principal skills that students need, no matter their discipline, so that they're transferable, and things like creative, critical thinking skills, some technical expertise in terms of different fields, and to be able to communicate your knowledge, but to be able to work in an international setting. And so, again, I think we need to, my whole thing is always start strategically thinking, what is it that we're trying to achieve, and then what's the most effective way to get there? But make sure it's flexible, make sure that what you're doing is transferable, and then try to work with the different stakeholders to produce and deliver the product.
Thank you very much. May I take that as the last? Sorry, we don't have any more time, but you can ask the speakers later after the session. Please join me in thanking the speakers again for their excellent presentation. I would like to now close the session. Thank you.
On behalf of APAIE and Mahidol University, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to our moderator and all three guest speakers for the impressive presentations and discussions. Thank you very much. And for the audience, coffee break is now available, and I will see you again at 11 o'clock for the plenary sessions and the closing ceremony. Thank you.